Every Sunday dinner, I made my wife serve the food. Then I'd find something wrong with it. The rice, the soup, the way she held the spoon. I'd correct her in front of my mother, my brothers, their wives. I did it for 5 years. She cried every single time. Until one Sunday, she didn't. She just looked at me, smiled. And that smile burned my whole life to the ground. Subscribe before you hear what happens next. Because this story, my story, is the reason I now eat alone. My name is Obinna, and I want to tell you how I went from sitting at the head of a table surrounded by family to sitting on the edge of a mattress in a 2-bedroom flat in a Chara layout, eating cold jollof from a plastic plate. I want to tell you how I destroyed the only woman who ever truly loved me. Not with my fists, not with affairs, not with any of the things people expect. I destroyed her with words. Small, sharp, weekly words, served every Sunday like clockwork. And the worst part? I enjoyed it. I thought it made me a man. I thought it made me the head of my house, but I was not the head of anything. I was just the loudest person at the table. And loud men always end up alone. Let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand how a man like me ends up in a place like this. Obinna Madu married Adaize Okafor on a Saturday afternoon in March, inside a small Anglican church on the outskirts of Nsukka. He was 31. She was 26. He worked as a mid-level manager at a cement distribution company in Enugu, not wealthy, but comfortable enough to rent a decent 3-bedroom flat in Independence layout and drive a used Toyota Camry that still looked respectable on the road. Adaize was a trained caterer. She had built a small cooking business in her hometown, private parties, church events, funeral receptions. And she was good at it. People came back for her food. They remembered her name. Her chin-chin was so popular during Christmas season that women placed orders 2 weeks in advance. She was building something, slowly, honestly, with her own 2 hands. But when Obinna's mother, Mama Madu, sat the couple down 2 weeks before the wedding in the family's living room, she made one thing clear. "A wife does not do business," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "A wife keeps a home. If my son is providing for you, what are you selling food for? Let that thing go." Adaize looked at Obinna, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He sat beside her on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He said nothing. So she folded the business, packed up her supplies, gave her client list to a friend. And she brought only one thing from her old kitchen into her new marriage, a clay pepper grinder, small and rough and brown, made by her late grandmother in their family compound near Nsukka. It was not beautiful by any measure. It was not valuable. But her grandmother had used it every day for 40 years, grinding uziza and uda seeds until the clay walls were stained dark with spice. When Adaize held it, she could still smell those seeds. She could still hear her grandmother humming over the fire. She placed it on the kitchen shelf in Obinna's flat the day she moved in. It was the only thing in that house that felt like hers. The first Sunday dinner after the wedding set the pattern for everything that followed. Obinna's family gathered every week without exception. His mother, his 2 younger brothers Chukwuemeka and Tobena, and their wives Nkechi and Ugochi. They came to Obinna's house because he was the eldest son. It was tradition. It was expected. And Adaize understood that this meal was not just dinner. It was a weekly performance of family hierarchy, and she was expected to play her part perfectly. She spent the entire morning cooking, jollof rice with perfectly fried tomato base, egusi soup thick with stockfish and spinach, fried plantain cut on the diagonal, golden and crisp. She set the table carefully, arranged the serving bowls, made sure the drinks were cold and the napkins folded. When everyone sat down, she served each plate herself, starting with Mama Madhu, then the brothers, then the wives, then Obina last, because he liked to be served last, like a king receiving tribute. Everything was good. The food was seasoned well. The portions were generous. Chukwuemeka was already reaching for a second helping of plantain when Mama Madhu tasted the soup and set her spoon down with a small, deliberate sigh. "It is not bad," she said, looking at no one in particular, "but it is not like mine." She did not say it with open cruelty. She said it the way a woman says something she has rehearsed in the car on the way over, casual enough to deny, sharp enough to land. And Obina, watching his mother's face across the table, wanting that approving nod he had chased since boyhood, he added his own voice. "Ada, next time just watch how my mother prepares it. You will learn." It was nothing, almost nothing, a sentence that a generous person could mistake for advice. But Adaeze felt it land in her chest like a small stone dropped into still water. She smiled and said, "Yes, I will try." And that was the beginning, the first cut, so small she almost convinced herself it did not bleed. By 6 months, the dinners had become something else entirely. Obina had discovered a formula, one that worked every Sunday without fail, one that made him feel large and necessary and feared. He would wait until everyone was seated and the first bites had been taken. He would taste the food slowly, dramatically, turning it over on his tongue like a judge at a competition. And then he would find something wrong. The rice was too soft. The stew needed more pepper. The meat was cut too large. Even my junior colleague's wife cooks better than this, and she learned from YouTube. It was never a private conversation. It was always a performance. Delivered loudly enough for the whole table to hear, timed for maximum impact. He would say his piece, then glance at his mother, and she would shake her head in rehearsed agreement, and his brothers would laugh. Not cruel laughter, not exactly. The easy, careless laughter of men who were grateful the spotlight was not on their own wives. Nkechi once told Ugochi in the kitchen while drying plates, "At least it is not us." And that quiet relief, that shared cowardice, kept every single one of them silent week after week. Adaeze cried after every dinner, not at the table, never at the table. She had learned that much. She cried in the kitchen while washing the dishes, tears falling into the soapy water where nobody could see them. She cried in the bathroom with the tap running so Obina would not hear. She cried in bed after he had fallen asleep, his back turned to her, snoring like a man without a single weight on his conscience. And when she tried once, just once, to tell him how his words made her feel, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap, he looked at her like she had said something absurd. "If you cooked better," he said without looking up from his phone, "I would not have to say anything. You are the one making yourself cry. Adaeze, not me." One Sunday in the 8th month, Adaeze used her grandmother's clay pepper grinder at the table. She had ground fresh pepper for the soup and brought the grinder out to add more for anyone who wanted extra heat. It was a small, ordinary thing, something her grandmother would have done without thinking. But Mama Madhu picked it up, turned it over in her hands, and wrinkled her nose as if she had found an insect on the tablecloth. "What is this old thing?" she asked. "It looks like something from a village market. You could not find a proper grinder?" Before Adaeze could respond, Obina reached across and took it from his mother's hand. He held it up for the table like a piece of evidence. "This is what my wife brought into this marriage," he said, grinning. "No business, no property, no savings, just this. This village grinder." Chukwuemeka laughed out loud. Tobena shook his head with that familiar grin. Even Nkechi covered her mouth to hide a smile. The whole table was in on the joke. The whole table except Adaeze, who sat very still, her hands flat on her thighs, her eyes filling with tears she refused to release. She reached across the table, took the grinder from Obina's hand without a single word, and placed it in her lap. That night, long after Obina was asleep, she washed it carefully under the kitchen tap, dried it with a soft cloth, and placed it in the bottom drawer of her bedside table, the one Obina never opened, the one that held her old photographs and her grandmother's funeral program. She never brought the grinder to the dinner table again, but she kept it close, always close. In the second year, Obina was promoted to regional sales manager. The salary increase was not enormous, but it was enough to change the way he walked through the world. He bought new furniture for the living room, leather sofas, a glass coffee table that Adaeze was afraid to put a cup on. He bought a flat-screen television that dominated the wall. He started wearing Italian leather shoes to the office and cologne that cost more than Adaeze spent on groceries in a week. And the Sunday dinners became louder, bolder, more theatrical. His criticisms of Adaeze grew sharper and more specific. He compared her cooking to restaurant food and found it lacking. He compared her appearance to women he saw on television and in magazines. He once told the entire table, leaning back in his chair with his arms spread wide, "You know, most women from her village would kill to live the way she lives. But she still cannot get the basics right. 5-star accommodation, 1-star wife." Mama Madu did not laugh at that one. She did something worse. She nodded. Adaeze sat at the end of the table with her hands folded in her lap. She said nothing. But that evening, after the dishes were washed and the leftovers stored and the kitchen floor mopped, she sat on the edge of the bed and asked Obina a question she had been holding inside her chest for months. "Can I start my catering business again?" she said. "Just small, private orders. I miss cooking for people who enjoy it." She did not say the last part, "who enjoy it," with any bitterness. She said it like a fact. Obina did not even look up from his phone. "My wife does not need to work," he said. "What will people say? That Obina Madu cannot provide for his family? Forget that nonsense." She did not ask again. She lay down on her side of the bed and stared at the wall. But something in her shifted that night. A small, quiet rearrangement behind her eyes, like a door closing in a room that no one was watching. The birthday dinner happened in the 3rd year, and it was the night that everything inside Adaeze changed direction. Not suddenly, but permanently, the way a river changes course after one final rain. Her birthday fell on a Sunday that year. She did not expect a party. She did not expect gifts or flowers or any grand gesture. But she thought perhaps someone at the table, perhaps Obina, perhaps even Mama Madu, would say the words, "Happy birthday." 2 words. That was all she wanted. The dinner proceeded as usual. She cooked, she served, she sat. The table was loud with the usual conversation. Chukwuemeka talking about his car troubles, Tobena complaining about fuel prices, Mama Madu critiquing the neighbor's new paint job. Nobody said anything to Adaize beyond, "Pass the water." And then her younger sister called from Nasuka to wish her a happy birthday, and the phone rang loudly in the middle of the meal, when Adaize answered and said, "Thank you, my sister. Yes, today is the day." Obina's face changed. He had forgotten. The realization crossed his expression like a shadow. Embarrassment first, then irritation, then the instinct that always followed. The need to deflect, the need to attack. Everyone at the table understood what had happened. The silence confirmed it. And instead of apologizing, instead of saying something simple, something human, something a decent man would say, Obina did what he always did. He turned it into a performance. Another year older, and she still cannot make proper ofe onugbu, he said, gesturing at the table. What is there to celebrate? Mama Madu laughed first, a short, sharp laugh that gave the brothers permission. Chukwuemeka smiled. Tobena looked down at his plate, but said nothing. Adaize stood up from the table, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bathtub. She cried, but this time the crying was different. It was not the helpless, drowning crying of the first year. It was focused, controlled. The crying of a woman who had just made a decision she would never reverse. When she came out, her face washed and her eyes dry, she went to the bedroom. She opened her phone and created a new note. She titled it Sundays, and she wrote down every insult Obina had spoken that night. The exact words, the date, who had been sitting at the table, who had laughed. She went back to the dining room, sat down, and finished her food in silence. From that night forward, every single Sunday dinner was recorded. Every word Obina said, every laugh, every date, every name. Adaize was no longer just enduring, she was documenting. The woman who lived 3 houses down from Obina and Adaize was named Folake Adeyemi. She was 43 years old, divorced for 6 years, and ran a small restaurant near Ogwi Road called Folake's Kitchen. It was not a big or fancy place, 10 tables, a counter with stools, a kitchen in the back with 2 industrial burners, and a deep fryer that popped and hissed all day. But it was always full at lunch. Workers from nearby offices, university students stretching their allowances, market traders who needed real food before the afternoon rush. They came because the food was honest and the portions were fair, and Folake remembered what they ordered without writing it down. She had noticed Adaize for months. She saw the way Adaize walked in the evenings. Not the walk of a woman going somewhere with purpose, but the aimless walk of a woman leaving a place she did not want to be. She saw the red eyes, the silence, the way Adaize greeted neighbors with a quick smile, but never stopped to talk, as if standing still for too long might cause something inside her to break. One afternoon, Folake was struggling to carry bags of rice from a delivery truck parked in front of her house. Adaize was passing by on the road. Folake called out, "My sister, please help me hold this bag before it falls and I lose my profit on the ground." Adaize helped. They talked while stacking the bags. Folake offered her a bottle of cold Fanta. They sat on Folake's porch as the sun went down. Over the following weeks, the friendship grew in small, careful steps. Folake never pushed. She never asked directly about Obina or the marriage. She did not need to. She had been married to a man who used words the same way. and she recognized the damage like a doctor recognizes a familiar wound. One afternoon, weeks later, Adaize mentioned that she used to cater events before her marriage. Folake put down her drink and looked at her with the kind of seriousness that stops a conversation. "You are a trained caterer," she said, "a woman with a real skill. And you are sitting inside that house doing nothing with it?" Adaize shrugged, the way a person shrugs when they have accepted something they should not have. "My husband does not want me to work." Folake nodded slowly. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "And what do you want, Adaize?" It started small. Adaize began coming to Folake's kitchen on weekday mornings after Obina left for work. She would help with prep, dicing onions, seasoning stews, arranging lunch plates before the rush. She did not accept money at first. She told herself she was helping a friend, keeping busy, staying sane. But Folake saw what Adaize could do with ingredients the way a musician sees another musician pick up an instrument for the first time and play something extraordinary. Adaize's pepper soup was the kind that made grown men close their eyes and exhale slowly. Her fried rice was clean and balanced and had a smoky depth that Folake could not replicate no matter how many times she watched. Her chin was crisp without being dry, sweet without being heavy. Within 2 months, Folake's lunch crowd grew by 1/3, and most of the new customers were ordering items that had not been on the menu before. Adaize's items. "You need to start charging for this," Folake told her one morning, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is not charity work, my sister. This is talent, and talent has a price." Adaize hesitated for 3 days. Then she opened a bank account. A separate account in her own name at a branch in Abakpa, Nike, where nobody from Obina's office or social circle would ever walk in. She began taking small catering orders through Folake's network, office lunches for a law firm, birthday parties in residential estates, small weddings in Amine and Achara. She kept every naira in that account and watched the balance grow with the quiet satisfaction of a woman planting seeds in soil she owns. At the Sunday dinners, nothing changed on the surface. She still cooked. She still served. She still sat in her chair and absorbed whatever Obina decided to throw at her that week. But the crying had stopped. Not all at once. It faded gradually, the way a wound closes when you finally stop touching it. She was not healing because Obina had changed. She was healing in spite of him, and that made all the difference. In the 4th year, on a Tuesday afternoon, Obina came home 3 hours early. A shipment had been delayed at the depot, and his afternoon meeting was canceled. He walked through the front door, dropped his keys on the table, and heard sounds coming from the kitchen that did not match his expectations. He walked in and found the counters covered with large aluminum trays, foil wrapping, printed labels with a phone number he did not recognize, a cooler bag packed tight with containers of chin and meat pies, and Adaize standing at the stove with her back to him, stirring a pot large enough to feed 40 people. She turned around and froze. Her eyes went wide. Her hand tightened on the wooden spoon. "What is all this?" Obina asked. His voice was not angry, yet. It was confused, suspicious. The voice of a man who has walked into a room and found it different from the one he left. Adaize's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face stayed remarkably calm. "Folake has a church event this weekend," she said. "A Thanksgiving service. I am helping her prepare the food." Obina looked at the trays. He looked at the labels. He looked at the quantity of food on the stove. "Since when are you Folake's assistant?" he said, his voice hardening. "I told you to stay away from that woman. She is divorced. That is what happens to women who cannot submit. Their husbands leave them." Adaizi nodded. "It is just this once," she said. "I will clean everything up before dinner." Obina stared at her for a long moment, then walked to the bedroom without another word. That night, after he fell asleep, Adaizi packed every piece of her catering equipment into bags and carried them to Folake's kitchen before dawn. The trays, the cooler bags, the packaging materials, the labels, all of it. She would not make that mistake twice. By the 5th year, Obina Madu was living at the highest point of his life, or what he believed was the highest point. He had been promoted again, this time to Deputy General Manager for the entire Enugu region. He bought a new car, a dark blue Hyundai Tucson, that made the security guard at his estate salute a little straighter when he drove through the gate. He renovated the living room again, adding air conditioning and new curtains. He talked openly about buying land in Transikulu and building a house. At the Sunday dinners, he was untouchable. His brothers looked at him with admiration. His mother praised him at every opportunity. And Adaize was the quiet, obedient woman at the end of the table who served the food and never once raised her voice. Obina believed he had built the perfect life, a wife who knew her place, a family that respected him, a career that was rising with no ceiling in sight. What he did not know could fill a warehouse. He did not know that Adaizi's catering company now had a name, Ada's Table. He did not know she had 12 regular corporate clients, 3 hotel contracts, and a growing reputation that was spreading across Enugu entirely by word of mouth. He did not know she was earning nearly as much as his deputy GM salary. He did not know she had met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Barrister Chisholm Ease, who practiced family law from a small office near New Haven Junction. He did not know about the journal. 5 years of entries, every Sunday documented in precise detail. Every insult recorded with dates, exact words, and the full names of every person who had been present at the table. And he did not know about the apartment, a clean, furnished 2-bedroom flat in a Chara layout that Adaize had been renting for 3 months, stocked with her clothes, her documents, and her grandmother's clay pepper grinder. Obina Madu knew none of this, because in 5 years of marriage he had never once looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and wondered what she might be thinking. The last dinner was on a Sunday in November. The harmattan had come early that year. The air was dry and fine with dust, the kind of air that cracked lips and made everything feel brittle and ready to break. Adaize cooked the same meal she had cooked 100 times before. Jollof rice, pepper soup, fried plantain. She set the table with the same plates, the same glasses, the same arrangement she had perfected over 5 years of Sundays. She welcomed Mama Madu at the door. She greeted Chukwuemeka and Nkechi, Tobena and Ugochi. She served each person their plate in the same order she always had. She sat down last, and she waited. Obina tasted the rice. He chewed slowly, theatrically, turning the food over on his tongue like a man preparing a verdict. He set his fork down. He wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin. And like a man reciting lines from a script he had memorized 5 years ago, he said, "Ada, even after all this time, you still cannot get the rice right. Honestly, my mother's house help cooks better than you." He looked around the table for the laughter. Chukwuemeka obliged with a tired smile. Tobena shook his head. Mama Madu pressed her lips together in that familiar expression of rehearsed disappointment. But Adaize did not cry. She did not flinch. She did not push back her chair and walk to the bathroom. She set her fork down gently, lifted her eyes, and looked directly at Obina. And she smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic or wounded smile. A calm, steady, finished smile. The kind of smile a woman gives when she has already made every decision that matters and is simply waiting for the clock to reach the right hour. Obina blinked. The smile unsettled him in a way that 5 years of tears never had. "Did you hear what I said?" he asked, his voice rising. "The food is not good. Are you deaf now, too?" Adaize stood up from her chair, slowly. She smoothed the front of her dress. She looked around the table, at Mama Madu, at the brothers, at their wives who had never once spoken up for her. And then she looked at Obina. "I heard you," she said. Her voice was even, controlled. "I have heard you for 5 years, Obina. Every single Sunday, every single word, and I wrote them all down." She walked to the bedroom. The table went silent. Even Mama Madu's mouth closed. Adaize returned carrying a brown envelope and a thick folder. She placed the folder on the table, first in the center where the serving bowl usually sat. "This is every insult you have spoken to me at this table," she said. "Dated, every word recorded exactly as you said it, with the names of every person who was present, your mother, your brothers, their wives, all named." She placed the brown envelope beside the folder. "This is from my lawyer, Barrister Chisholm Ease. Her number is on the letterhead." Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and took out something small, rough and brown, the clay pepper grinder. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight in her hand, and then she placed it on the table beside her untouched plate, in the exact spot where Obina had snatched it from her hands 4 years ago and held it up for the family to laugh at. "I am taking this with me," she said quietly. "It is the only thing in this house that ever truly belonged to me." She picked it up, slipped it back into her pocket, and walked to the front door. She did not run. She did not raise her voice. She did not look back. She opened the door, stepped through it, and closed it behind her with a soft click that sounded, in that silent room, louder than anything Obina had ever said at that table. Mama Madu was the first to recover. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the floor, and said, "That girl has lost her mind. Call her people. Tell her father to come and collect her before she embarrasses this family." But Obina did not move. He sat perfectly still, staring at the folder and the envelope on the table, as if they might disappear if he looked at them long enough. Chukwuemeka reached over and opened the folder. He read the first page silently, then the second, then the third. He closed it, placed it back on the table, and exhaled through his nose. "She wrote down everything," he said quietly. "Every single dinner. Dates, words, names, everything." And Nkechi stood up from the table without a word and walked into the kitchen. Ugochi followed. Tobena rubbed his face with both hands and then said something that nobody at that table expected to hear from him. "It was too much," he said. "We all knew it was too much. Every week we sat here and watched and laughed." Mama Madu turned to him with fury burning in her eyes. "You are taking her side?" Tobena held his mother's gaze. "Mama," he said, "I am telling the truth. We sat here and laughed every Sunday for 5 years. What did we expect would happen? Obinna went to Nsuka the following week. He drove alone, arriving in the late afternoon when the light was golden and the dust settled on everything like fine powder. He parked his Tucson under the mango tree in the front yard of Adaizi's family compound and asked to see her father. The old man came out slowly, leaning on a walking stick, and sat on the wooden bench by the door. He did not invite Obinna inside. He did not send anyone to bring water or kola nut. He simply sat and waited. Obinna spoke for 20 minutes. About the marriage, the dinners, the misunderstanding. He used words like culture and tradition and how we were raised. When he finished, Daisy's father was quiet for a very long time. Insects sang in the grass. A motorcycle passed on the road. Then the old man spoke. "You mocked my daughter for 5 years," he said, "in front of your people. Every week you sat at that table and you made her small. You took her cooking and used it against her. You took her grandmother's grinder and turned it into a joke. And now you drive here in your fine car to ask me for what? Forgiveness? Understanding? Go back to Enugu, Obinna. Go back to your Sunday table and find your forgiveness there." Obinna drove back in silence. The lawyer's letter was direct. Adaize was filing for divorce. She was not asking for the house. She was not asking for money or property or any share of his salary. She wanted only the legal end of the marriage and the freedom to continue building her business without his name attached to it. She wanted nothing from him. And somehow, that was worse than if she had tried to take everything. 3 months after Adaize walked out of the house in Independence Layout, Obinna was driving through the GRA on a Wednesday afternoon when he saw it. A white delivery van parked in front of the Golden Gate Hotel. On the side of the van, in clean green lettering against a white background, were the words, "Ada's Table, Catering for All Occasions." Below it, a phone number, a small logo, and a website address. He pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. He sat in his car and watched. Through the hotel's glass entrance doors, he could see movement inside. Staff in matching green aprons carrying trays of food, arranging a long buffet table for what appeared to be a large corporate function. And then he saw her. Adiz came through a side door carrying a clipboard, talking to a young woman who walked beside her, taking notes. She was wearing a simple white blouse and dark trousers. Her hair was pulled back. She moved through the space like she owned it, not with arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had earned the right to be there. She said something to the young woman, pointed toward the buffet arrangement, and they both laughed. A real laugh. The kind Obinna had not heard from her in years, maybe ever. He sat in his car with the engine off and the windows down, and he watched his wife, his former wife, and something inside him cracked open. Not broke, cracked, like a wall that had been hiding what was behind it for years. She had been building this the entire time. While he performed at the dinner table, she was building a business behind his back. While he mocked her cooking every Sunday, she was feeding corporate clients and hotel guests across Enugu. While he was making her small, she was becoming something he never imagined she could be, and he had never seen any of it, not a single sign, because he had never once looked at Adaize and seen a person. He had only ever seen an audience. I live in a Chara layout now, 2-bedroom flat, small kitchen, a refrigerator that hums too loud at night and keeps me company, whether I want it or not. My mother calls sometimes, usually on Sundays out of habit, but she does not mention the dinners anymore. When I ask about my brothers, she changes the subject. Chukwuemeka and Tobena come around less and less. The Sunday dinners stopped completely after Adaize left. Nobody suggested starting them again. Nobody wanted to sit at that table. Tobena told me once on the phone, quietly, like he was ashamed of the words even as he said them. "We were all guilty, Obinna, but you held the knife. I eat alone now. I cook for myself badly, and I eat standing up in the kitchen because sitting at a table by myself makes me feel something I cannot name. It is not sadness, exactly. It is not regret, exactly. It is something heavier than both. It is the weight of understanding precisely what you did, and knowing there is no action you can take to undo it. I thought humiliating Adaize made me the head of my house. I thought if she was small, I was big. But I was never big. And she was never small. She was always the strongest person sitting at that table. She just allowed me to believe otherwise, because she was quietly building something that did not need my approval, my permission, or my name. I mocked her cooking for 5 years, and she used those 5 years to become one of the most respected caterers in Enugu. I told her she brought nothing into our marriage, and she walked out carrying everything she needed in her pocket. Adaize's kitchen is different now. It is larger and brighter, with stainless steel countertops and industrial ovens, and a walk-in cold room stocked with ingredients for the week's orders. Her company, Ada's Table, employs 11 people: cooks, drivers, an office manager, a young apprentice who reminds her of herself at 22. They cater weddings and corporate events and embassy functions and private dinners across Enugu and Abuja and beyond. On the wall above her main prep station, there is a small wooden shelf, and on that shelf, beside a framed photograph of her grandmother standing in front of the family compound in Nsukka, sits the clay pepper grinder. She does not use it for grinding anymore. It is too precious for daily work, too full of memory. She keeps it where she can see it. Every morning when she ties her apron and begins the day's prep. Every evening when she wipes down the counters and locks the kitchen door. It sits there, small and rough and brown, and it reminds her of 3 things: where she came from, what she endured, and what she built with hands that a man once told her were only good for serving his plate. She never went back to that table. She built her own. If this story made you feel something, if you saw someone you know in Obinna or in Adaize, then subscribe to this channel, because every week we tell stories that hold up a mirror to the things people do not want to talk about. Hit the like button, drop a comment and tell us what you think. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe, because the next story we tell might be the one that changes how you see everything.